Thank you, Helen. Could we remove the...
Yeah, I'll just stop it. Hang on a
Yeah,
second.
great. Thank you very much indeed. That was very, very interesting. Covered a wide range of issues there. I think there were some questions beginning to come in, but perhaps I'll start things rolling, and then Rob, you can pass on whatever the questions, what questions we've got. I was interested, I mean, you just going to the solutions, you talked about a ministry of, having a separate department for poverty reduction, and a minister. And I'm sort of agnostic, because I've and many others have argued more for a cross-departmental strategy. And I just worry slightly about if one compartment takes it out, sort of isolates poverty as somehow different, separate from everything else, which, as you say yourself, it's such an important aspect of a just transition. Is there a danger that it kind of marginalizes it, as opposed to having, and you would have to have very clear mechanisms for ensuring that virtually every department, because we had a debate here in the Lords last week about across departmental poverty reduction, and it struck me that virtually every department has some policies that are relevant to tackling poverty. So just perhaps to encourage you to say a bit more about why you've gone for that government structure as opposed to another one, cross departmental one.
Yeah, so I think the reason I'd like it is because I think it will provide proper focus. Whereas if you go just for departmental, it becomes like yet another target that departments have to deal with, along with a whole range of other departments that a whole range of other targets that they have to deal with. And also it provides someone's neck on the line, essentially. So if these ministers, if the Prime Minister, and you have a Minister for the Elimination of Poverty, there will be implications for their careers if they don't do it. And you have an individual who's, you're going to have to have quite an unusual individual, but someone who's literally going to say, if I don't manage to do this or even come close, then I'm going to take the hit for it. And I think that kind of focus will really help. And I think it helps the public as well to be able to look to one person, because you would need a nationwide kind of understanding of why this is necessary. And we saw during COVID that actually people look to individuals, because we do have quite a kind of presidential style way of running government, in a way that it's so individualistic. So I think that would help. I also think it would help with providing money for new areas, like a new system of exchanges. And if it's one of the most important jobs in government, then they're more likely to get the cash, essentially. But I would like to see new systems developed which are hard to cut. And that's why I think a national system of exchanges, which is not in the charity sector, would be really useful, because otherwise it's just too easy to cut them. And we saw that with austerity.
Thank you. I suppose I'm quite cynical, but my fear is that it wouldn't be one of the most important departments in government. And but still, could I ask, are there any parliamentarians who would like to ask a question? Because we have a tradition in APPG that parliamentarians have a sort of first bite at the cherry of any questions. Does anyone want to ask any questions? And just to welcome David Linden, who's the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Is there anyone who would like to, if so, put up a yellow hand, perhaps? If not, I think the first question from Tom McGrath, who would you like to ask your question, Tom?
Yeah, I can do.
Oh, sorry, I've just noticed that Debbie Abrahams, who is a parliamentarian, so I'll ask her first if you don't mind. Debbie.
Hi there. Good to see you, and very interesting talk. Thank you very much, Helen. I have to agree with Ruth in terms of a separate department. I mean, the cost in having a separate department would be, I think, significant. And I do think it needs to be every government department's business. And I particularly would want to, thinking about the future, I'd want poverty and inequality to be fully integrated into every government department. But I think the idea of a minister, where that minister might sit, I was just chatting with my with one of my members of the staff about where it could sit. So we're already getting ideas around that. But anyway, I think that's very important. Some very useful points, I think, in terms of particularly around housing. And I thought the links that you made, Helen, about the costs on society as a whole, on each department, including health, which is where I, my professional background and one of the reasons I became an MP. But it's really useful, I think, to have this debate. So you're absolutely right. It's going to be a key one in the general election, and rightly so. The levels of poverty and destitution across the country are just absolutely unacceptable. That we are still a rich country, and that's not reflected in the lives of too many of our citizens. So, but thank you very much, Helen. Very, very interesting. Don't forget Social Security amongst all this. We have a very holy system, and that needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Tom, I think you were the first to put something in the chat, and you've got your hand up. I think I'm going to do it by hand because actually it's easier than trying to work out from the chat. Tom, and if you could make it as quick as possible.
Yeah, sure. So I work for an organisation called Careful Trouble. We work in digital inclusion issues. What do you think about sort of the current approach? I think to poverty has been sort of segmenting it up into different types of poverty. So you've got like energy poverty and policies to address that, data poverty. In some cases, I've seen like bed poverty. Do you think that's useful, like to focus energies on a particular area, or do you think it distracts from things and makes it? My worry sometimes is that it adds too much complexity for the person being supported, and you have to jump through so many hoops rather than having, a more effective social security system. So I'm just kind of interested as to where you view that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. At the moment, Britain is too piecemeal. So much of it is about where you live as to what support you get and what charities are in your area. And that's partly why I wanted a department, so that there's proper holistic work of all this stuff, because it all feeds into each other. And actually having a more holistic approach, I think, would save money in the long run. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really hard for people who are living in poverty to have to deal with quite so many agencies, because of course they're traumatized. And when you're traumatized, all you can do is cope with now, and anything extra is too much. So even if you've got support in your local area, or online, it can be really hard getting it, just taking that extra step. And I think even if you provide a lot of support, if it's piecemeal, it can be really hard emotionally to take, and to take it on board. So yeah, I would like to see a much more holistic approach. Thank you.
Mohamed, you had a question about training.
Yeah, I had a basic, thank you first of all for the presentation, Helen. My question was really something from a faith and a cultural perspective. I personally feel that sometimes those people who are delivering issues for poverty and trying to tackle that are not really understanding the issues facing certain communities, which may be due to religious, cultural, or taboo subjects. And how do you ensure that those are not really missed through the straps? And we do have that during the pandemic. We have a very aware of that sort of poverty going through. We still have a lot of poverty in certain areas where families feel ashamed to go to food banks, and they may be actually going through. So whilst I accept that there is a need for a department, but I also tend to agree that really this area of poverty cuts across all the government departments, and there should be a cohesive approach to it. Just like I've given an example for bereavement, a person is bereaved, right? They can not only go to DWP, they've got to go to different section, and they're already in a very traumatized situation. So I just really wanted your view to see that, did you tackle that issue in your consideration? So that's what my question is.
Thank you, Mohamed. So actually, it's the bereaved comment is actually quite appropriate here, because actually now what you have is the kind of system within this government where you only tell one organisation and then they tell everybody else, and so it does make it much easier for people who are bereaved. And I think you're right as well that there are definitely cultural changes. We saw that at the food banks during COVID, that there wasn't enough halal meat and so on. But I don't have all the answers, but I don't need to have all the answers, because if you have genuine focus, then you will get them. You will have thousands of people across our society, both in the charity sector and in the civil service, local authorities, who will be working towards this. And that's what I mean about the need for focus. I understand that that new departments are expensive, but if you've got people who already understand the topic and are going straight in, already running, because they already know what they're doing, and there's a full plan in place that's been given to the public, so the public know what to expect, then I think that could speed up, because you've only got 5 years. It's, there's so little time, and that you need the plan in place before you start government, so everybody knows what to expect. But you're right, and it would have to be a much more holistic response. But it's one of the reasons why I like the national system of exchanges when you talk about the concept of shame, because you can use an exchange for environmental reasons. If it's sold to the public that this is good for our environment, then it doesn't matter who you are and what your background is. There's no shame using the NHS. There shouldn't be any shame using an exchange.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're running out of time, so perhaps we've got Marjorie and we've got Geoff, who both want to ask questions. So I suggest that you both ask them, and then if you can deal with them together. Helen, Marjorie, you first, because you did put yours in the chat.
Helen, I'm going to deviate from what I put in the chat, because I'm going to say thank you for including us domestic violence survivors, because I am a survivor, and our perpetrators financially cripple us, put us at extreme risk and things. And we do need to review the DWP support of survivors, because it's very dangerous if we don't get the adequate support and things to help us detox from the ugliness of violence and rebuild our lives. It puts us in a dangerous situation where we could either go back to the perpetrator and our next beating be a murder, or we commit suicide with the post-traumatic stress depression. So please, and this really is important, and one of the reasons why I joined the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Poverty. When I first joined you, I had £3 in my bank account and my stomach was rumbling, and I came into Parliament to try and get my voice heard for all women survivors. So thank you for including us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marjorie. That's really, I'm so sorry.
Marjorie. Geoff,
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Helen, for the presentation. I'm Geoff Fimister. I work in the anti-poverty and welfare rights field with various different organisations. Helen, you raised a lot of really interesting stuff there, with a lot of specific proposals which would cost various varying amounts of resource. I think some of the big picture issues like housing and social security will require significant resource to do anything much about them. So my question is, how do you generate the political will? It's not looking very auspicious at the moment in election year. The government is rumoured to be looking at tax cuts and potentially minded to pay for that through social security and other public spending cuts. We'll know more about that in the budget next week. And Labour is being very ultra cautious about agreeing to spend any money on anything much. So in that kind of climate, how do you generate the political will?
Thanks, Geoff. And then Vanessa, I'll just bring you in very quickly and then ask Helen to respond to the three of you, and then we'll have to finish this bit of the meeting, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I've put a question on the chat and to say I've got the book. Thanks, Helen. Loads of great information. Thank you for writing it in such an accessible way. Sometimes we get far too much academia and not get to the point. So thank you for that. I haven't read it all yet, but I did skip ahead because I want to look at your plan for the future. Love all the practical recommendations that we're seeing there. But I was curious about your view of something we've already got in law, but dormant in England, the Socio-Economic Duty. Section 1 of the Equality Act, rolled out in Scotland and Wales. England's successive governments have been abandoning and ignoring it. But it, of course, would require national and local authorities to consider poverty-busting consequences and considerations every time they make a decision or policy. So I was curious about your view, whether that might support your recommendations of embedding it. But I also want to just address what people said about mainstreaming. As an equity specialist who's worked in-house as well as a freelance consultant, the idea of mainstreaming without someone to be the specialist coach, advisor and accountability holder to ensure it's all cohesive and coordinated. We've learned that with health and safety, safeguarding, equality, these roles, you still need a specialist person or team or some resource to actually coordinate and chase it up and make sure it happens. So I just wanted to add that on that discussion of mainstreaming versus dedicated department. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Okay.
Helen, and I must ask you to try and be as quick as you can,
Yeah,
please. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much for all of those. Marjorie, I'm so sorry to hear about what you've been through. Yes, absolutely. Domestic violence is a key area, and I know that universal credit is, particularly poor for when households, the money is given to one person for the household rather than to individuals, and I think that would be a policy that creates and maintains women's poverty. So that could be something that would be changed. The political will, Geoff, it's really hard. I'm not suggesting that this is an easy option, and it may be that actually this happens in 5, 10, 15 years time. That this, for me, this is about normalising the concept of eliminating poverty from Britain rather than seeing it as some mad revolutionary act. In my view, it should just be something standard that all developed countries want to do. But that means more education, and that's partly why I wrote the book. On socio-economic duty, yes, absolutely. Again, I think if you had a department for the elimination of poverty, you would have one of the things would be how to embed that in society, and I don't think it's unreasonable to look at poverty when you're creating policies. But I would like people also to have had some sort of training in the biology of poverty so that we maintain that compassion and get rid of the idea of the undeserving poor, which is really insipid in our society. And we need to get rid of it in order to be able to move forward. So thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.